The following program is a special presentation of KETC, made possible through the generous support of its members.
Are you ready with film?
Ready, Mr. Scout.
Roll it.
Even in a century of technical wonders, television was remarkable. If live moving pictures traveling through the sky to our homes were not a miracle, what was?
Okay, my time was running low.
Those early images, grainy and colorless as they were, reached out and pulled us into a world that seemed more interesting than our real lives. We moved the furniture and made a place for our new television set in the living room. Every evening, the entire family would gather in front of it and watch. No one had ever seen such a thing before, and then suddenly it was everywhere. It grew overnight from a novelty to a necessity. There was hardly time to ask, what should we do with this incredible invention? There was an experiment. Today we call it public television, and much of its early history began in St. Louis.
Produced by KETC.
On September 20th, 1954, KETC, channel number 9 as it was called, broadcast its first flickering signal to little fanfare and practically no audience. That it ever became more than an idea is as miraculous as television itself. Its survival, in spite of the odds, and sometimes in spite of itself, is the story of a vision made real and the community that made it possible. The war was over. But peace would bring changes even more profound. St. Louis, along with the rest of America, was trying to return to normal, as life was before the war. But the world had crossed into a new age, and there would be no returning to what had been. We didn't understand how things that seemed so small at the time would change our lives so much. On February 8, 1947, television station KSD Channel 5 signed on the air to a handful of television sets. And suddenly, we could bring this new world into our living rooms.
You go out and you get your so-called low price that you think is so low.
When Steve Mizrahi began selling television sets in the late 40s, he couldn't keep up with the demand.
I don't care where you go.
We didn't have the TV. We only had one on display, and we put their name down, and we'll call you whenever we get the screen. What brand? They didn't care what brand it was. All they want to know is give me a TV.
The rush for station licenses was so great that in the fall of 1948, the Federal Communications Commission imposed a 90-day freeze on applications, which was extended until 1952. There were questions. A machine in every home that could receive sound and pictures could impact the very fabric of American life. What kinds of programs would it deliver? And who would control it?
Procter & Gamble's new Golden Fluffo. Fluffo, it's really different.
Most Americans understood television as radio with pictures and expected it, like radio, to provide entertainment as a hook to sell products. But some saw a chance to reserve a small corner of this new medium for other purposes.
And we saw it was the same as the Aerobee rocket.
What if there were a channel that offered you the chance to get an education, learn about issues in your community, or enjoy a concert? No one understood that better than Frida Hennock, the Joan of Arc of educational television. Hennock was as charming as she was abrasive, striking, brilliant, prone to wear big hats and make dramatic entrances. And like President Truman, who appointed her the first female FCC commissioner, she feared no man. Born in Poland, Hennock, as many immigrants, valued education and saw television as a way to bring it to everyone. She bullied, charmed, and cajoled her fellow commissioners and anyone else who would listen to support the idea of reserving channels for educational television. In 1951, the FCC sent a letter to the mayors of major cities, including St. Louis, asking if a channel were reserved for educational television in their city, would they use it? The idea appealed to St. Louis Mayor Joseph Darst, who created a committee of local educators to come back with an answer.
He said, if there were a television station which could bring to people the big issues, where they could get both points of view or all points of view, it could be like a light for our whole city.
Young businessman Ray Witkoff chaired the committee.
I had two qualifications. I had no connection with education and I had no connection with television. But I got excited about this. The more I thought about it, it seemed to me to have enormous possibilities.
No one on the committee wanted the responsibility or expense of a television station. So they proposed creating an independent commission to hold the license, a body that would represent the entire region. That idea became known across the country as the St. Louis Plan. The report back to the mayor was mixed, a kind of yes, but. Surely an educational station would be good for St. Louis, but it would have to be supported by some kind of national network. Mayor Darst asked Witkoff to organize a national meeting in St. Louis to see if it could be done. In January of 1952, educational television advocates from 28 cities met at St. Louis's City Hall and resolved unanimously that a strong national network of educational stations ought to be created.
Well, there were two newspapers in St. Louis at that time. Both of them reported on the meeting the next day, and each made the same mistake. They thought that the decision had been made to set up the network. As a matter of fact, we had no resources at all. We didn't have enough money there to buy lunch for our guests.
The paper's mistakes were a blessing, encouraging bigger players to get involved. Nobel Prize-winning physicist and Washington University Chancellor Arthur Holly Compton granted land for an eventual studio on the campus and temporary use of the women's gym at McMillan Hall. St. Louis University President Father Paul Reinert offered to share his school's tower and transmitter. The St. Louis Public Schools pledged financial support for the production of educational programs which would be broadcast to schools. In April of 1952, the FCC set aside channels for over 200 educational stations. In December, the St. Louis Plan became more than a plan, with the creation of the body that would govern Channel 9 for the next half-century. Members of the St. Louis Educational Television Commission represented the city, the county, and a variety of civic and cultural organizations. Washington University employed young television producer Charles Guggenheim, who was charged with hiring staff, purchasing equipment, creating programs, and putting St. Louis's educational television station on the air.
At that point, no one knew what public television was. I was very happy to do it. I had been, and I say in retrospect, very lucky to be. I was in commercial television at its birth in New York. I worked 3 years for a very successful independent television producer, probably the most successful at the time in New York. So I learned an awful lot. But I had come out of World War II, and I didn't think I wanted to spend my life dealing with advertising people.
The new station would need a name. Guggenheim suggested the board submit 5 sets of call letters to the FCC, which granted St. Louis KETC for Educational Television Commission at Channel 9. Idealism and cooperation had taken the effort far. Now some money would come in handy. Lots of money. The Ford Foundation was pledging to match money raised by cities to build educational TV stations. Arthur Baer, president of Stix, Baer and Fuller, offered a gift large enough to secure those matching funds. Additional donations came from various corporations and foundations. City and county schools committed $1 per student to support educational programs. A Mother's March for Channel 9 brought in more than $100,000 from door-to-door solicitations.
We were out in the front lawn with the children were playing, and my neighbor on the left of us came by. She says, they're thinking of building a new TV station, Channel 9, I think they're going to call it. And they're all looking for people to donate whatever they can. And I said, what are you soliciting for? How much you? Well, she says, we're giving 20. Do you think you can swing that? I says, oh, sure. I wasn't going to let her think I couldn't afford $20. So anyway.
Mrs. Lena made the donation in the name of her two sons, John and Vincent.
Everybody thinks I spoiled my two boys. And, but anything that I could give in this world that would benefit them, I'd lay down my life for them. It was just anything I could do for them. And I thought, I don't care what it costs, I'm going to do this for them. And I'm sure that later on they'll appreciate it. And that's really why I did it. Didn't think about anything else but the two of them when I did that.
It looked as if St. Louis might launch the first non-commercial educational television station in the nation. Station manager Guggenheim led a talented crew of young producers, including Mayo Simon, who would enjoy a long career in New York and Los Angeles writing for television, movies, and the stage.
There was a tremendous amount of energy. You could feel it. They were young and excited. They thought this was the new thing. Television is taking over, and people are sitting there in front of their TV sets going, "Buh," looking at a lot of ads. So they were excited about it, and it was lots of fun.
Guggenheim and his staff ordered equipment, designed a permanent facility, created shows, and waited for the station's commission to raise more money. Highly creative and uncompromising in the quality of his productions, Guggenheim's vision of educational television was a grand one, demanding skillfully shot and thoughtfully edited programs on the arts, science, history, and social issues. Even as money and equipment were slow to arrive, Guggenheim and his producers moved ahead, recording programs on kinescope, an early method of recording television programs for eventual broadcast. Commission members objected to the expenses. Guggenheim grew increasingly frustrated, trying to communicate with board members who, it seemed, didn't understand what it took to produce television in a studio that was, well, less than ideal.
It was a women's gym that I think was probably less than 100 feet long, had large windows on the side, which you could hear all the noise from the playfield outside. And I guess I told you the story before, but one of the board members, executive board members, who will be nameless, when I went to the board meeting once, I said, we got this item, and they said, what's this item for? I said, we need to close those windows up, because we're getting noise into the studio. And one of them said, well, why do you need to spend so? Couldn't we do it less expensively than that? I said, well, it's not very much money, but he says, but it's money. I said, that's true. He says, why don't you just hire a student to stand outside and say, shh?
KETC's hope of being the first educational television station in America was lost in May of 1953, when KUHT in Houston signed on the air. Tension between Guggenheim and board members, largely over money and vision, grew until July of 1954, when the board fired him.
It was a terrible blow. He had no idea this was going to happen to him. And he stood out in the front of the Macmillan Hall with tears just rolling down his cheeks, saying, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And we all said, you're going to start your own business and you're going to do all right.
Charles Guggenheim went on to become one of the century's greatest American filmmakers. Today, his monument to the dream is viewed daily by thousands of visitors to St. Louis's Gateway Arch. Years later, while visiting Channel 9, he was gracious.
I think we really scared them, and probably rightfully so. I mean, I would guess that's true. It's easy, I think people like to say, well, he was fired, then he went off and did good work, and therefore weren't they dumb? I'm not sure they were dumb. I I'm not giving him a lot of credit for being imaginative or going at the future of television in the way it deserved to be. I think St. Louis very early, but now of course it's come into its own, but I think very early could have been a much bigger player.
KETC was scheduled to sign on in a matter of weeks. Public relations firm Fleischman Hillard loaned one of its top creative people, Martin Quigley, as temporary station manager. Ironically, he had to rehire Guggenheim long enough to help him put the station on the air. On September 20th, 1954, a small group of supporters gathered in the McMillan Hall Gymnasium to sign on America's 8th public television station. There were likely more people in the studio than there were viewers throughout the entire region. At 8:55, the test pattern was broadcast. At 9 p.m., General Manager Quigley welcomed viewers to channel number 9. After a few appropriate remarks from Dr. Arthur Holly Compton, Channel 9 aired The Second Opportunity, a play about free thought.
It was really the best of St. Louis, the best and the brightest of St. Louis coming together for something new, getting it off the ground, and it worked. Financing was always a problem. Fundraising was always an issue. So it was always contentious, and yet it was always very creative and very good.
It was a night to celebrate, but no one at KETC was completely certain of just what they had created or how they were going to keep it alive. But they got it on the air, against the odds, in spite of themselves, and as grassroots an effort as the launching of a television station could ever possibly be. In March of 1955, the station moved into what would be its home for more than 40 years, on a corner of the Washington University campus at Millbrook and Big Bend, the first facility in the United States built to house a public television station. A painting, Education Through Television, by St. Louis artist Fred Conway, covered most of a wall in the foyer. Today it hangs in the downtown St. Louis Public Library. Inscribed on another wall was wisdom from the Book of Proverbs, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." That spring, Channel 9 opened its doors to its viewers, including many of those who had gone door to door to raise money the year before. A procession of the curious filed through the studio, eager for a peek behind the curtain of television's magic. A Post-Dispatch photographer was there that day, capturing the reaction of visitors as they stood before the cameras and watched themselves on the studio monitors.
Civil defense problem here is that this bomber, if it drops an H-bomb on the area,
KETC had a plan, broadcast educational courses during the day for schools, and entertaining shows for kids after school.
Hello, boys and girls. Today on Here and There, your teacher, Mrs. Sally Grayson, is going to take you up in the air and out into outer space.
Hello, boys and girls. The man you've been seeing is not really a man from Mars, but he certainly looks like it, doesn't he? He's really...
Evenings, the station would air insightful, socially relevant programs, boldly, perhaps naively, competing with Ed Sullivan, The Honeymooners, and I Love Lucy. Even though stations swapped programs through the National Educational Television Network, a precursor to PBS, they were very much on their own when it came to creating local shows. But Channel 9, in its first year, produced a hit.
Sonny Fox searches the world for interesting people, places, and things. When he finds them, he brings them before his television cameras for you to see. That's why he's called The Finder.
We just didn't know what educational television was going to be. We didn't know what television was going to be. We didn't know what we were going to be. But it was a great time. It was a very exciting time because nobody could tell us what we couldn't do because nobody knew what we could do. And if you flopped, went back the next day and did it again. It wasn't the end of your career.
Hi. Well, I'm the finder, and this week, as every week, I've been out chasing around in my Corvette, my airplane, finding unusual things and interesting people and exciting places. And I guess that's why, although my name is Sonny Fox, I'm called the Finder.
Mr. Fox! Oh, Mr. Fox!
You know, that sounds like Henry the Hummingbird, my friend.
I think this is probably a great definition of chutzpah. Here I am in St. Louis, and it was the second year the Corvette was being assembled in St. Louis. Called up the man who was in charge of distribution of Corvettes in this area. I said, here's the deal. Give me a Corvette for a year. I will feature it every day at the opening for a program that's going to be seen on a station that's not yet on the air, that's an educational station, and a show that's aimed at 6 to 12-year-olds. That's the deal. And for some strange reason, the man said, okay. I had a Corvette.
And largely by accident, the Finder provided the first clue that somebody out there was watching.
We did a show on spelunking, cave exploration. And I got the idea, say, well, you know, I worked with those people at the Onondaga Caves. I said, well, if we brought people out, would you do that? So we set up a whole way of doing that one day. And I announced on the air that, you know, if you wanted to go out, you know, write in, we'd send you a ticket and you could go out and then it would be free and all that. But when I drove out that day and found that there were maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people out there at the Onondaga Caves, all our minds were boggled. We really did not know. It was the first time I understood, number one, that we had an audience, but more importantly, that we had the power to move people. We had the power to get them out of their homes, away from their television sets, and actually make them go somewhere of a nature like the Onondaga Cave. That was the beginning of what I think is a sort of a lifetime arc of a challenge of how to use the power of television for more than just selling products.
I figured that you were the one to help me.
Well, I'd be glad to help you. What do you want?
Well,
Educational stations across the country picked up the Finder, and before the end of the first season, Sonny was tapped by CBS, the start of a brilliant career in network television.
There's something about St. Louis that almost despite ourselves, we're able to come up with things of quality. And then we let them go. Charlie Guggenheim, you know, Sonny Fox, and but you know, once they're identified and once they do their stuff, others identify them and steal them away.
And yet, in its first year, KETC produced more programs for national distribution than any other educational station, largely because of Washington University's willingness to lend the talents of its own staff. The university paid the salary of Mayo Simon, who produced Religions of Man, hosted by Professor Houston Smith, an early national model of educational television excellence. Simon also produced Soapbox, hosted by Ran Lincoln, exploring such local issues as poverty, racism, and social justice. Soapbox broke new ground in television programming.
This is the slum. It covers 1/4 of the city. The casual visitor, the tourist, the driver who's lost his way, will come through these streets without stopping, but his eye and his ear will pick up impressions which he'll not soon forget. Good evening. My name's Ran Lincoln. Tonight we're going to talk about bad housing and meet some of the people who live in bad housing.
But the paint was hardly dry on the walls of the new building before the station faced potential financial ruin. In the spring of 1955, the board, believing it had gone to the well too often, voted to stop public fund drives, prompting cuts in production and layoffs.
I was really very sad because all of these fine young people were there with their families and had to sell their homes and go to all different places, different parts of the country to get jobs again.
So in addition to a mural and words of biblical wisdom, there was some new handwriting on the wall of Channel 9. Shows cost money, and good shows cost a lot of money. there were other well-produced shows when funds were available. Science and Human Responsibility, hosted by Arthur Holly Compton, explored the question of how science could better serve humanity. Compton's personal interest in the subject stemmed from his role as a physicist in the creation of the atomic bomb. Free Assembly was a regional electronic town hall meeting, taking on issues many as touchy today as they were in the late 50s.
Ram Lincoln, Chairman, has called the Assembly to order.
Order, please. Order, please. The Assembly will now come to order. The fifth pre-Assembly is now in session. The question before the Assembly tonight is residential segregation.
I'm not going to move into a colored neighborhood, and I'm not going to move into a mixed neighborhood.
Well, that's all well and good. Times are changing, and as times change, laws have to change.
If times change or laws change, when we have somebody to destroy the Constitution of the United States, the basis that our laws is drawn on, my God, what would happen to you or I?
In television studios, this is the sign for stretch. And if you're on camera, you don't like to see it because it means we have more time than material. Make it up. Stretch. Well, by the late 1950s, somebody at Channel 9 was...
Let's have a look at where we're doing this series. The studio of KETC. Here, a cameraman responsible for the visual part of this program. And here, the floor director, responsible for seeing everything in the studio is going as the director wants it to go. Over here, we have a musician, John Stauber. He will furnish background music for some of the programs. There are many other engineers and technicians in the studio, all concerned with producing this program to help you learn more about the city of St. Louis. This will be the stool where I'll be sitting, and this the backdrop, and here my clipboard with the notes that I'll use in helping tell you about the city around us. Let's light the set and get set.
And of course, there were those moments that only live television can provide.
One of the notable programs had to do with the history of jazz. When this jazz group was in the studio, and I suppose one of the musicians had imbibed a bit too much before the broadcast, and the heat was stifling, the lights were intense, and the cameraman expertly panned as one of the musicians just passed out and slowly fell to the ground.
The public schools, which contributed a major portion of the station's budget, saw in-school television as a way to relieve the mounting teacher shortage as the baby boom exhausted their resources. It seemed logical. Educate through educational television. But in an age before TiVo or even video cassettes, schools had to arrange their class schedules around the station's broadcast schedule, which few were willing to do. Whatever the future held seemed anybody's guess.
Someday, you too are going to go in a jet maybe, or maybe even someday when you're grown up or your children are grown up, you'll get to fly on a rocket ship that might take you as far away as the moon, which is very far.
Sometimes the station's meager resources forced it to be more creative. In the late 50s, decades before anyone talked about interactive television, the program Metroplex encouraged viewers to create listening posts, places for neighbors to gather and watch panelists discuss issues, and then do something no television station today would ever ask its viewers to do.
At the end of phase one, we'll ask you to turn off your set, discuss the merits of the views you've heard, and phone in your reactions, your suggestions, and your questions. Then after 1 hour, we'll be back again for phase two of the assembly. These same witnesses will be here to answer the questions you phoned in.
By 1964, though, most viewers were turning off KETC through lack of interest in its programs or inability to pick up the weak signal. And when it seemed things could not get worse, the Globe Democrat in the spring of 1965 ran a series of articles accusing acting general manager Robert Nissen of having communist associations. The paper charged that KETC had aired programs distributed by the National Educational Television Network that were soft on communism. The charges were devastating for Nissen, his family, and KETC. Nissen resigned. In 11 years, 8 general managers had come and gone. There was no rush among the qualified to become number 9. It had been a noble experiment. They fought the good fight, but it looked as if it were over, and the station's board was seriously considering sending Channel 9's license back to the FCC. Why Robert Glazier decided, against his better judgment, to take the job was a mystery to everyone in the industry, except he was known as a man who enjoyed a challenge.
Oh, I turned them down 4 times. 4 times. And very definitely. And said, I don't want to hear any more about it. It seemed like the more I turned them down, and the more critical I was of some of the things that were going on, the more they decided that I was the one they wanted. And so we sat down one day at a conference, and they said, well, just tell us what you want. Just tell us what you want. And it wasn't money.
Glazier wanted control of the station. He understood the trap that had caught every other general manager who inherited the station's problems, but not the authority to solve them. The board finally handed him the reins, and in August of 1965, he left his job as head of Nashville's thriving educational station to come to St. Louis. But as he explored his new station, he became convinced that he had made the biggest mistake of his life.
It was much more of a mess than... I would sit on the edge of my bed half the night every night. My wife pounding my head and saying, why did I do this? Why did I tell them that I would help them?
Glazier brought with him his chief engineer from Nashville, Jack Vines, who had his own doubts.
There were 3 black and white cameras. They had been set out in the parking lot with the lens removed. A thick soapy paste was mixed up, and they were brushed into the inner workings of the camera and washed down with a garden hose, a cleaning process that no one had ever heard of. So those cameras were questionable at best.
You know, with the studio empty and just a warehouse, I said, they must have put all their money in that transmitter. I can hardly wait to see it. And we went up there, and the engineer was working around with rubber tubing, they were spouting water. And it looked dangerous to me. I wasn't sure I should be there.
To make matters worse, the union that represented the station's technicians called a strike. It was bound to be a stalemate. The station truly had no money, and the local was fed up trying to negotiate with general managers who kept disappearing. It lasted years before it was resolved. 10 years old, and Channel 9 was starting from scratch.
People had not heard of Channel 9 in the schools and the public and everything. So I made really worked a hard circuit. The staff gave me a little tin cup somewhere along the line because they said, that's what you do, you go out and rattle the tin cup.
Some of our viewers have asked us how we support a television station like this, a non-commercial public television station.
He revved up the Memberthon, granddaddy of today's pledge drives, as popular then as they are today. But they raised money and put a new emphasis on what would grow into a major source of funding, station memberships.
The crew is ready. Roll sound. Sound's rolling. Roll camera. And mark it.
1A95, 5014.
Laid up. Okay, hold. Action.
Film crews were back in the field, shooting programs for KETC, as well as for the BBC and other educational television stations. In 1970, A Special Kind of Morning, a documentary about 2 8-year-old girls discovering an awakening St. Louis Zoo, was nominated for a National Emmy Award. It was beaten by a new children's television show called Sesame Street. This single remaining copy has faded badly, but it was Channel 9's first locally produced program broadcast in color. The studio was busy again, producing shows for students and for adults who tuned in to learn more about everything from art, history, and religion to social skills, vocational training, and belly dancing. And as the cameras rolled, the station's printing press cranked out a steady stream of instructional literature to accompany the programs. So you could not only watch Laura Weber's Hootenanny, but for $10, KETC would send you 3 books and a record.
My colleagues in public broadcasting probably rightfully accused me of being the only manager who had a publishing house with a TV station on the side.
This is St. Louis, Missouri, right?
This is St. Louis, Missouri. And you know what's so special to us about seeing you? You can see us.
Fred Rogers brought his neighborhood to St. Louis. And for one very special day, the Channel 9 studio became the land of make-believe.
It's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling. You're growing inside, and when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day.
In 1974, an odd tribe of creatures descended upon the station. It was the invasion of the letter people.
Oh, I certainly hope so. Listen, you know, since I'm the star of this show, I'll sing the lead. Now here's a little something that we have learned to do. It's called the swoosh, and it's real fun, and you can learn it too.
Letter People was a series of reading programs produced at KETC and distributed to 75 cities. It was solid educational television, and it was kind of groovy. Tom McDonough was the producer and leader of the young band of puppeteers, actors, singers, and designers who put life into the Letter People.
You know, we were all friends, too. It had a marvelously free spirit to it. And nobody made a lot of money. And, of course, I worked, you know, they should have gotten a cot to roll out at the station, because I was always at the station doing something to get that show on the air.
And they were all doing their own thing. You'd find them in the restroom, you'd find them everywhere. It was like we were infested with these puppeteers. And they'd be out on the lot or outside or whatever, and they were just roaming around there doing this rehearsal thing with their puppet. And you know, our staff would say, good morning, Mr. T, or good morning, Mr. H, how's your best today, and stuff. And it was just sort of like part of the family.
Come and meet the letter people.
Not since the days of Charles Guggenheim had KETC been so close to the cutting edge of television technology.
The television picture is called video. Many programs are copied by a videotape machine so they can be broadcast to your home at a later time.
In 1971, the station built a new transmitter site and a 1,000-foot tower. Broadcasting in color and at full power, Channel 9 was finally playing on an even field. For the first time, every home in the region could turn on the television and watch KETC. But the cards were still stacked against a television station that couldn't sell commercials. By the mid-60s, it was clear that if educational television was going to have any future, it needed a business plan. The Carnegie Commission produced a study that resulted in the Public Broadcasting Act, which President Johnson signed into law in 1967. LBJ saw public television as part of the Great Society, a means to deliver information, art, and culture to every American. The law created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which would distribute federal funds to public broadcasters. By 1970, the old National Educational Television Network had evolved into PBS, or the Public Broadcasting Service. That's service, not system. PBS was not to be a fourth network, but a loose confederation. There would be some federal funding, but stations were to be largely self-reliant. But from the moment of its birth, PBS began delivering programs with depth and quality rarely seen on commercial television. The nation was watching PBS. its shows were becoming a part of mainstream culture. There had always been two schools of thought on what public television's role should be: deliver instructional programs, as it had for years, or appeal to a larger audience with informative and entertaining programs on public affairs, art, history, science, and news that weren't available on commercial television. And it seemed that would be the trend. Bob Glazier was an educational television man. He had always loved television's potential to teach. He resigned in the fall of 1976, having taken Channel 9 from the brink of disaster to a new age where it was a serious player. But there was an even newer age for public television on the horizon, and that would be ushered into St. Louis by someone else.
What I think we were able to do was to bring Channel 9 into everybody's awareness. It became a place that people actually would stop on the dial.
Almost overnight, Tony Tiano took KETC in a completely new direction.
There had not been, because of Bob's philosophy, there hadn't been much attention paid to the primetime evening programming. He had really devoted most of his time and energy to serving the schools, and that's a very important thing to do. And we wanted to continue to do that, but we also wanted to see if we couldn't provide some services in the evening. And so it was a station that hadn't seen, it was a market, an audience, that had never seen most of what public television had on the air everywhere else in the country. We changed the logo of the station. It's a little embarrassing to remember that we called it the New 9, which nobody'd ever do today. I mean, nobody would ever be able to sort of stomach that. But we called it the New 9 with a new logo and brought in a whole lot of new programming. And it did. We were very fortunate. The television critics and the folks who were supporting and looking at the station were very positive about it.
Tony Tiano was a very show-busy guy. One of his things was to do a New Year's Eve party in the studio with a live audience, and the entertainment was Steve Martin and the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. And it was fabulous. It was back in the days when Steve Martin was doing that arrow through the head thing, you know, and wear the white suit and was saying, "Excuse me."
Tony had pizzazz, and that's what it would take to put KETC on the PBS bandwagon and make St. Louis pay attention.
So all of a sudden we've got the News Hour, we've got programs like Masterpiece Theater, American Experience, great performances. All of those things are starting at just about the same time, and they're on the air and they become huge hits for public television.
He turned on-air auctions into major community events, bringing a small army of volunteers into the station.
The volunteers were a delightful group of people who were proud to be there and wanted to be seen on television. And of course, the goodwill that we generated, I think, was extremely important. It was no longer just an educational, if nothing else is on television, you might tune into. But there were some very avant-garde things going on.
Everything is so terrific now, I am going to stay. Oh, you're going to stay? Yeah.
Channel 9 was getting hip. There was buzz in St. Louis and around the country about this PBS. This could have been the end of our story. Plucky little station fights the odds, elbows its way into the limelight, where after all these years, it finally receives the respect that it deserves. And they all lived happily ever after, curtain, applause. But there's more to the story. After less than 2 years, Tony Tiano left KETC to take charge of PBS station KQED in San Francisco. His successor, Michael Hardgrove, would lead the station for almost 25 years. But if it seemed that Channel 9 could finally breathe easier, surprise. Because the entire world in which television lived would change more rapidly and dramatically than anyone could possibly imagine. Interesting times pose dangers and opportunities. The question is, how do you tell them apart? And what do you do even if you can? KETC's survival would depend on doing just that.
This is the worst business plan you could have, which is to create a product, give it away, and then ask people to pay you for it.
The phones are ringing. We can't thank you enough if you're on the phones right now.
But that's what Channel 9 had always done, and the public had always responded, because there were no other choices for certain kinds of programs. But the sudden growth of cable and satellite surprised both commercial and public TV with new competition. Surfing replaced watching. PBS lookalikes appeared across the dial, presenting movies, nature programs, shows on history, cooking, home improvement, art. PBS dropped its slogan, "If we don't do it, who will?" Life in television has long been a game of technological leapfrog. We jumped from film to video, black and white to color, analog to digital. But new discoveries and inventions come so quickly to the industry today that knowing how, whether, or when to implement them is critical. Channel 9's new high-definition editing suite offers the ultimate in video quality and represents the future of television as we see it today. Soon our television sets and personal computers will merge in a world of instant digital information. Every technological leap is expensive, and the station that acts too late, jumps too soon, or chooses the wrong path risks extinction. But that same technological explosion offers solutions as well. Today, with access to a digital television receiver, you can tune in Channel 9.1 to watch programs in high definition, Channel 9.2 for children's programming, or 9.3, which broadcasts Channel 9's regular analog signal. Finally, KETC had the means to deliver to its viewers a wider range of programs than it ever imagined possible. Federal deregulation of the broadcast industry has resulted in a few large companies owning most of the nation's radio and television stations.
In many communities, the public TV station is nowadays the last remaining locally owned station. There is almost no local television left on commercial television. Whether that's good or bad is not for me to say, but it certainly leaves a void that it falls upon the public-oriented television station to serve.
Good evening, I'm Dennis Riggs, and this is Highway 40.
Through the 1980s and 90s, Michael Hardgrove would oversee the production of innovative, locally produced programs on public affairs, the arts, minority issues, and cultural events.
During the time that I worked at Channel 9, there was a strong commitment to producing local programs because we felt that that was the best way that we could attract a larger audience, was to focus on issues that news stations could not take the time to delve into. So it was a wonderful time to work at Channel 9 because we had artistic freedom and there was a creative energy, there was a group of producers, and every night we had a locally produced show on the air.
That seems fair to me.
Fairness isn't the issue with anything.
In 1987, KETC launched one of public television's most popular and enduring local programs, a show that has been imitated by other PBS stations across the country.
Welcome to Donnybrook, a freewheeling exercise with no holds barred. I'm Martin Dugan, and I want you to meet my cast of characters. Mark Vittert, founder of Business Journal Publications. Ray Hartman, editor-publisher of the Riverfront Times. Bill McClellan, columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Rich Coster, national sports editor of Business Journal Publications.
By the time we started Donnybrook, Channel 9 had evolved into quite something else too, right? It had the news hour and various documentaries and all good, clean, quality stuff as I saw it. And I figured we would have the freedom to say what we wanted to say, and also the magic, I believe, is no commercial interruption.
In the highly competitive and rapidly changing world of 21st century television, KETC would stand out from other stations by being the region's storyteller, exploring who we are and where we came from, how we think, and what kind of future we're building.
We must maintain our relevance in the future if we are to be viable
as a community entity. And there's no question that we think that we can. Our strategic plan pushes us into more local programming, more education services, the things that really are the roots of public television.
Channel 9's outreach programs take education beyond the airwaves and into homes and neighborhoods, providing learning tools to people of all ages, from preschoolers to adults, encouraging literacy and curiosity.
Many people are surprised that Channel 9 is involved in education. They see what we do on TV, but they're amazed that we go out to the community and really connect teachers and parents and caregivers and kids to resources to help them learn.
When Channel 9 outgrew its old home on the Washington University campus, the St. Louis community provided the financial support the station needed to build one of the finest public television stations in the nation, in the heart of Grand Center in Midtown St. Louis.
It was not a quick or easy decision for the trustees to make, because at that time Grand Center was just beginning to evolve. And I'll never forget our board chairman at that time, talking about the move to Grand Center, said, I don't mind being a pioneer, but I like to look back and see more wagons coming.
More pioneers did come. And as KETC moved into new studios and a new century, it had more cause for optimism than it ever had in a half-century of broadcasting.
I've just been checking up on some of my correspondents who work with me all over the world. These correspondents are boys and girls who are finders in their own country. And they find interesting peoples and places and things and write me about it, and I'll tell you about it. Now,
somehow the dream was kept alive. And, you know, what's going to be exciting is to see where it's going to take you from here on out. You know, we were the pioneers, but in effect, you're still pioneers here.
If there's reason to believe that Channel 9 will celebrate more anniversaries, it's because some ideas, no matter how idealistic or seemingly impractical, survive because they are good ideas. Channel 9 will live as long as the community wants it to, as long as it offers a kind of television that can't be found anywhere else.
Local services are truly what will make us relevant in the future. There's no question about that. And who better to do it than an organization that's owned and operated by a group of community leaders. And our responsibility is to provide services that no one else will venture into. They may not be commercially viable. It's an ability to get the information out there so that our viewers can be better informed and make better decisions.
Now that I've reminded you of the rules, let's begin.
Without being dull. And it took years for KETC to evolve from television that's good for you, as if it were a kind of media medicine, into a multimedia source of information, education, and entertainment.
It's the challenge that never stops, never will stop. How do we do better? How do we connect better? Where do we go that we haven't been before? How do we take whatever our resources are and use them in a new and more adventurous way?
We always need to be asking, is the job done? Is the role of public television over? And some people would argue and have argued, yes, but they made that argument sometimes, 20 or 30 years ago, and we're still here. And they should be making, I would hope, those same arguments 20 or 30 years from now. Because the question is, why are we here? What do we need to be doing? And that makes us keep trying to find the right answer to that.
Most television stations measure their success by ratings. And even though KETC is consistently among the 5 most watched public television stations in the nation, it also subscribes to another rating standard.
Public television is intertwined in its community with the quality of life. And from the quality of life comes economic development, satisfaction, a great place to live. Those can't be separated. KETC is an intrinsic part of that.
We are absolutely committed to making sure that Channel 9 not only celebrates this 50th anniversary, but celebrates 75 years, 100 years.
50 years is a milestone. Today we tell our story and celebrate. Tomorrow we will go back to work because of you.
is I'd look at a picture of the early commission, and all of them are gone. I was the youngest of them, and I had the joy of this, but it's a little bit sad when I reflect on them. And yet, I feel good about it, because when I see how this station is thriving, I say to myself, these friends of mine from way back could have the satisfaction of knowing that they'd planted some seeds that are really flowering. So the overall feeling one gets is a kind of joy.
Most of all, a city has to have people. Without people, there would be no city. As Shakespeare said, what is a city but its people?
Have you ever wondered where shoes came from? Well, today, we're going to find out all about shoes because we're going to go to the Buster Brown Shoe Factory where they make them. Come on, let's go.
My moo cow was the most important thing. Adults and children alike wanted the moo cow. Everywhere I went in the village, I would take out the moo cow.
And good evening to you, Mr. Rank. He was playing when I came in, and I didn't want to disturb you. It sounded so wonderful.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Nice to see you again here tonight.
I know. I'm very happy to be invited back.
Goodbye, boys and girls. When you put your shoes on tomorrow, think of us on Here and There.
Bye.
Produced by KETC.